Welcome back to Xraised, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. If you joined us in our last episode, you'll remember we spoke with Laina Chan and Dr. Brydon Wang, diving into how students, young professionals, and tomorrow's legal leaders should learn, think, and prepare for a world where governance, tech, and intelligent systems are evolving faster than our textbooks can keep up. It was refreshingly accessible, the kind of conversation that makes you look at the future with equal parts excitement and responsibility. And today, we shift from the future of talent to the future of power and how we ensure intelligent systems are designed to serve society fairly, transparently, and ethically. And to guide us through that, we're keeping the same dream team. Joining me again are the legal tech force multipliers. Laina Chan, leading barrister expert in complex litigation and a tech governance thinker who founded MiAI Law, with Dr. Brydon Wang, an expert in trustworthy AI regulation and the integration of technology in societies. He's also the Adjunct Associate Professor at the Center for Policy Features at the University of Queensland and Associate Director with KPMG Australia. Hello, Laina. Welcome back, Dr. Brydon. How are you
Thanks for
guys?
having me.
Very
Good.
impressive.
Well, thank you for your time again. Today, I want to zoom out and look at the systems themselves. We're stepping into ethics, power, and intelligent systems. How do we design AI for a just society? Who decides what's ethical? And what happens when machines begin influencing outcomes that affect real people? So, everyone we know talks about ethics in AI, but no one seems to agree on where those ethics actually live. So let's kick this off with a deceptively simple question and the perfect opening for this chat. Where do we believe ethics
Where do you
actually lives
believe?
in AI? Is it in the code? Is it in the people who design it? Or is it in the institutions, the ones deciding how AI gets used?
I think it's in all three.
I agree.
It's in all three. I think
It should be.
at the primary, uh, the first issue is the person who's building the AI model, the tool, because they have to make decisions that may turn out to be ethical or unethical. I met someone last week who has delivered a tool that's making this person a lot of money, but it's completely unethical, completely. And it's just, and the consumer doesn't know better. And so the consumer is using something that they think that has been possibly vetted by a lawyer, but it hasn't been. And, and that person, the decisions that have been made by that person is what has delivered this extremely unethical tool onto the market.
So what you're asking is really interesting because you're going to the word ethics. So I did my PhD on trustworthiness, right?
Yeah.
And automated decision-making systems, which involve AI and stuff like this. Um, and for me, I think AI when it's coupled with decision making, that's when you really need to get it right in terms of this. To me, ethics, the word ethics really sits within one band. So when we did my study, um, uh, we, if you're sending out the signals of trustworthiness to someone who's taking your technology on board, it really needs to be done in three different ways. You need to send a signal of benevolence, which is an individual orientation on the people that are using your technology, right? To say, you could trust us, we mean you well, we're benevolent in that way, right? So that's individual orientation. The second one is that you exhibit integrity, and that really goes to ethics, right? So as a society, we'll all have sort of this value kind of consensus that we've reached. How you comply with the values that society has set in place, the laws, the standards, the norms. This is ethics. This is you being integrous. And then the third one is flowing out of that is then once you've got the standards, you'll then have very clear briefs where you need to hit the mark. So in order for your technology to be trusted, you also have to send out the signal of ability. It's got to do the things that you say it's got to do, right? It's got to have that ability to demonstrate the functionality that we want. And so you need to look at it in all three levels. So when you talk about ethics, I don't think it sits within the code level. I think the code level really needs to draw from the ethics at a design level. So the people designing it and the people, so when you say institutional deploying it, I think when you deploy a technology, they also need to be upfront as part of the as a stakeholder that is part of the design process. You can't design something and then shop it around as a finished product to an institution and say, hey, we've got a great product for you, why don't you just deploy it right now? There really needs to be some kind of involvement and discussion, because without that kind of discussion, you might comply with the standards and norms that society has placed, but it doesn't exhibit that kind of individualized kind of orientation on the users that you need to demonstrate, I think, something that's trustworthy. So that's where I think it is. I think it sits much further back. By the time you get to the code phase and where you've got people interacting and doing the code, it's too late. If that's where you're starting to inject ethics into it, it's too late.
There are ethical decisions that you make when you are doing the coding.
Oh yes, no, I think so, but they need
Absolutely.
to be.
I make those decisions all the time when I am coding all the time, because you can take shortcuts. You can take shortcuts and then you can. It's excruciating the level of painstaking detail that we have gone to context engineer. But you cannot
I'm
do that.
I'm
And you can
I'm
just
going to
say,
interrupt Lena really quickly, because I think, Lena, you need to understand that you're working in a very, very, very ethical area of the world,
no, I
like
understand,
in
but you
law, right? And so yeah.
yeah,
So every
but
time you
you
make a design decision, you actually think back, how would a law, like you're drawing back from something that's quite established. You're going back to your training as a lawyer, as a legal thinker when
yes,
you're
I
making
am
the design.
doing that. I am
Yeah,
doing that. That's right. But that's right. But you could choose not to do that.
yeah.
Right
Then
when
I
you
don't
were
think that's
doing
ethical.
yeah, but right when you are doing, yes, as a design, we have the overall, as a designer, we have values that we want to aspire to and what we want our model to do. Then right down at the code level, there are decisions that can be made to decide how you're going to implement that, your
Correct,
standard, and
correct.
to see, and then
But
it
that's
flows
ability.
through right
It's
from the
different.
top.
Yeah, no.
Yes.
So when you code it, you are creating the functionality that gives life, I guess, to the values that are
Yes,
decided
of
much
course.
higher
But
level. Yeah,
sometimes to do what I am doing, it's very token rich. It's very, very token rich to deliver the kind of quality that we're delivering. And it costs us more money to do it that way than if we just didn't. Right? So then you can make decisions at that level when you're actually coding, go, well, this actually is going to cost us more money to run it the way you've got it than if I just loosened it up a bit and
yeah,
let the language model be more
yeah,
creative
yeah.
or hallucinate. And then at the same time, you can as a lawyer, you can say that for us, we're saying we're only selling to lawyers, right? I'm not going to sell to a non-lawyer because I just don't think that's ethical for all the reasons we talked about in the last episode. A non-lawyer just really doesn't know how to unlock or appreciate the significance of the answers that they're getting. But then you can also make decisions that say, well, I'll sell to a non-lawyer, but I will just get them to agree that the answers will be vetted by a lawyer, etc., knowing full well they'll never do that. So there's so many decisions that have to be made along the way. And of course, there are consumers who go, why can't you just sell to us? And I go, well, I don't want to. It just doesn't feel right, right? Because you and I know how hard it is to get the right prompt. Like you have to be like, so much education goes into framing the correct question for the model.
Mm.
Absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely.
And
Um, yeah,
yeah, go ahead, please.
yeah. So basically, I think it's very clear what Lena, if we just to analyze what she says, I think she started talking from the integrity point of view, drawing from
Uh-huh.
her training as a law, because uh, you know, it's unfortunately a lot of the examples that Lena is going to give are already quite integrous. because she's already built within that law. If you go
Mhm.
into a completely different area of AI where there's no standards, no laws, nothing has been sort of formulated,
Yeah.
very difficult to know. You have to do it from the ground up and figure out what it is. But with the law and with its training, we know what is a good lawyer. We know what good law feels like. It's intuitive. It makes sense. Even if great minds might differ on its execution, there are certain touch points that are solid. And so understanding that and what she's describing from that integrity point of view, it's great. And then she's developing then all these
Mhm.
signals of ability by saying, how do we code this? And she
From
goes,
the
I'm going
root.
to do this regardless of whether or not it's going to cost more money because it's token rich. I'm going to do it because it needs that functionality, right? To
Mhm.
comply with the standards, the value congruence that we need to show to demonstrate integrity. But then she says, I'm not going to be selling to certain people who don't know how to use this, because if they were to use this technology in a way, it might, first of all, damage the law,
The
and justice, which
integrity.
is the indicative component. But really, that's an orientation on the individual. It's a benevolent signal that says, you know, I really do mean you well. I don't think this product is useful for you, because if you don't have the legal training, you're not going to be able to then work it out in a way that matches the integrity component that is required to use this technology. And then for you, whatever you pump out and generate won't exhibit the level of ability that we need the system to show. So you can break it down this way. It's very clear what she's doing. We just need to articulate that in that beautiful model that I did as part of my PhD. And it's not something that I invented, actually.
And
I
it's
it's
perfect, I
something
You
that
think.
can
I
tell
stepped in.
that he's the academic and I'm just the
I
person, on the tools.
but I
Very,
love
very
how
true.
how he summarizes everything, and I
Yep,
think I'm
yep.
gonna lose my job soon.
I know, it's great. He's done a great job. I love it. I'm the person on the tools, I'm just hacking the whole system together. And he's put
I
this
know.
fury
Yeah.
No, but I did
around
come up with the
it.
original framework. The original framework came out in the 1990s, when there was a lot of broken trust in the system in the corporate world. And so this
Mhm.
is called the Maya model. And these thinkers, I have so much respect for them. They reviewed the literature and they cobbled together this beautiful model of what is trust. Because trust, they say, is not a behavior, is actually an attitude that is related to risk. How willing you are to be vulnerable to a certain level of risk. And the moment you start tying it back to risk, the corporate world understands this. We can now talk about this because we know how to measure risk. We've talked about risk for a long time. So when you say trust is an attitude that's linked to how much risk that you can take, suddenly the conversation opens up. You're like, okay, let's talk about that. The
Mhm.
problem then is within the model is that it interacts. So how you trust me, or that attitude of trust is formed, is dependent on your own propensity to trust that is shaped by your life experiences, whatever it is. I can't control that. What I can control on my side is the signal of trustworthiness that I send to you, and the
Mhm.
interaction of the two then creates that attitude of trust. It's a really interesting sort of area of technology, like the interaction of technology and society, and that interface is where we go. What is trustworthy AI? What is trustworthy technology? It really
Uh,
comes down and boils
So
down
what
to
do you
this.
think? What do you think trustworthy AI is?
For me,
Yeah.
well, I think trustworthy AI is something that is targeted on that individual level that allows them to. So just on a very open level, trustworthy AI needs to start with trustworthy data, because AI is useless without data. And when we start talking about data focused technologies, you need to really look at who is the original data subject. You need to make sure that everything you do down the value chain looks back at the data subject and go, is this benevolent treatment of the data subject? Um, and I think if you start off with that question, that benevolence piece will then flow into your integrity piece that will flow down to your ability. So I think it starts from there. I think any framework of trustworthiness that doesn't look originally at the data subject, then I think misses the point. But it's a much more involved conversation that probably needs real life examples to be worked through. But I think as a general principle, if your data subject at the very start isn't treated benevolently, and we can debate what that is, but if that doesn't begin from there, nothing in the system works. So, for you, it's very clear that MiAI AI does start from that principle, because you're going to go, the principle here is you want to have good legal research and information that can be used further down the track. But you know who your data subject, or who the people who are going to be using your product is, right? And if that is not done correctly, then everything else, the decisions that make along the way are not hitched onto the correct sort of point. So
Anchor.
that's my view. Yeah.
That's true.
And I was gonna save that question for another episode, Lena.
That's okay, but now we've answered the next question as
Thank
well.
you. And
So yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
No, I've answered the next question. I just looked at the
Yeah.
next question you had for us. We've already answered it. So
Yes,
now we've made up
and
some
it
time.
just and
Yeah.
it basically just boils down to the process of doing everything the ethical way, from conceptualization to when the tool is live. I mean, this AI, my AI law, and I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Ethical decisions have to be made every single day.
And I just love how we're making this like a master class on ethics, as Dr. Brydon said, benevolence, integrity, and proving the functionality of your tool, delivering what you committed to deliver. I mean, it's a full body responsibility. And that's a big takeaway already. So let's go to what you've built from the ground up, Lena. My AI law has such an it has such an intentional ethical spine, or backbone. We know it generates evidence-based answers, it's secured, transparent, and the fairness is baked right in. What were the ethical boundaries you absolutely refused to compromise on during development, even if relaxing them might have, made the system more powerful or commercially appealing? Like
No, I
like
think
what
it
you've
was
said
my
earlier,
refusal. No,
yeah,
I
like
think it was my refusal to compromise on ethical. For example, we spent a lot of time working out how to extract pinpoint references from all of the judgments, and the pinpoint references and the names of the judges who were actually that we were citing in our answers. That was really hard. I don't think that anybody else has been able to solve this problem. And it was really, really hard. It delayed us by 6 weeks. I mean, the developers were working on it. They didn't know how to do it. And finally, I said, we have to ask Arjun, my chief technical officer. And so I went to him and I said to him, is this a problem that we can solve? And he said, yes. And so he worked really hard. They tried many different things, and he went through, and we kept going and we kept going and we kept going until we worked it out. And I think that we're the only ones, I believe, who have this functionality. So I've had a look at Lexis and I've had a look at Westlaw. They also have hyperlinks to the source. So it was all the time and effort and of not compromising on quality, so that at the end of the day, we can deliver a tool that is truly useful.
well,
We just never compromise on quality. And our anchor is the primary sources, the primary cases. So we never look at any secondary sources. We only ever look at the primary cases and the legislation.
well, adding
And
on to
then
that,
Mhm.
coming from my background, it's so tempting to, prioritize speed to market or flashy capability. But in law, I believe trust is the product, as Dr. Bryden highlighted earlier. If you break that trust once, you don't just lose a client, you undermine their entire decision-making chain. And let's switch to governance, Dr. Bryden. You spend a lot of your time in the trenches with government, policymakers, and organizations trying to modernize responsibly. This is where the risk really multiply. When society start outsourcing decisions to AI systems that optimize outcomes, but don't actually understand consequences, what do you see as the biggest danger?
I
What is it?
think I think the biggest danger is it's the lack of an overall picture of what's going on. So if you look at some of the ways things have fallen apart when we come to technology, it's not because one bad decision was made. It's oftentimes because these systems are so large, particularly when they touch, on big tech companies or big governments, or when they're rolled out to society. Um, Individual people are making very reasonable decisions within their silos. And as they make these reasonable decisions, because there's nobody with an overall sort of picture of how that eventuates or affects in the end, you can have very, very unfavorable or unfair decisions that are generated right at the very end. So if you don't watch and coordinate properly and really have that big picture all the time and asking that question, how does this affect that one person that we're looking at, that individual that's subjected to decision making, that automation process, then the question then becomes, do you have something that works? I think that there's that big risk that AI invisibilizes a lot of the necessity to coordinate, and that's a human coordination that I think needs to occur. I think oftentimes, if you've got these quick fixes to a lot of things and you take that on the assumption that that assumption is correct, I think you run a risk of the overall technology falling apart. That sounds extremely esoteric and not and very abstract, but if you think about robo-debt, that really used so in Australia we had a particular technology. It's not AI, but it was an automated decision-making process that used a wrong calculation that averaged a person's kind of income. And basically, what happened was then the government used that particular sort of way of calculation to calculate debt. And then it went after the most vulnerable people in society, saying, you owe us X amount of dollars, which was so painful for them to hear that quite a few of them eventually committed suicide. So the overall system, right, really needs, and when they went and did the research, they found that individual people, decision makers within the cogs of the machinery, were making relatively okay and reasonable decisions. It's just that the overall picture wasn't there. And so then you didn't trace through the effect that happens right at the very end. So you got to be very careful, particularly now with AI, and when we're able to accelerate decision making to that point, a lot of the interfaces and the assumptions that you're making, you got to be absolutely clear. And I don't think AI is going to give you that. It's got to be a human person, like you said, having that conversation and really going, can we test this? Is this actually delivering what we think it is, and what does it do to the individual sort of subject of such a decision making sort of process right at the very end? So that's kind of my view of what we need to be absolutely conscious of when integrating AI. I think there's a lot to be gained, but I think the risk there is also very, very high.
But what kind of decisions do you think should be automated? I don't, Brydon?
As in, well, my focus is always on infrastructure because like that. I think a lot of the times when you've got planning decisions, I think when a lot of the time when you're trying to figure out where infrastructure is or best suited to a particular population and their need, I think that's where AI and various automated decision-making systems can provide really good solutions. But we can't just assume that they're correct. We just need to test them, and exactly that duty of verification really exists. I think a lot of the times
human oversight. I really think you need human
correct.
oversight.
No, but we see that because we come from that legal background. But when you speak to all the people on the other side of the fence, the technological kind of experts and the technical teams, they're just going, this is amazing. Let's just run with it immediately, right? There's this there's very little doubt when on the other side of the fence with the technological optimism that exists with there. Like I think, when you've been trained in the law, you tend to be AI critical, and you just go, how is this correct? Can we just double check this? Not to say that it's going to be bad, but we just need to double check this. And I think when you're under time pressures, or when sometimes you suffer from groupthink and everybody's like, this is the most amazing thing that has ever been created, and you're just like, let's roll it out. It's going to benefit society. Sure, but you got to test it first. I think that's basically my view of that.
And I guess that visual alone makes the risk crystal clear. It resonates. We're already seeing how optimization can blindside judgment. Even outside law, a system can tell you the most efficient route, but not the human cost of that route, as you gave an example earlier, Dr. Brydon. And another key question.
I think that if you are going to use automated decision making relying on AI, there has to be a ability for the human being who is the the subject of that automated decision to tap out and ask for human overview and human review.
Yeah, but
If
sometimes
they're
we don't
not
trust the
happy.
human as well. You
Hmm?
get me? Sometimes we don't trust the humans as well. Like you think about in construction where we have security of payment issues that we've been trying to fix for decades. There's so Miles, in the construction industry, we have this thing where the head contractor tends to take the money from the principal of a project and plays around and uses the money, and instead of paying down the value chain. And sometimes they go bankrupt, and so then the people below, the subcontractors, the mom and pop businesses that have been working on the projects, suffer incredible financial harm. And so there's been financial fragility that's been in the construction industry for a very long time. And so um, you know I do think that sometimes technology should be there to prevent human gamesmanship when it comes to things like this. And it's almost in our interest to not allow human oversight over certain kinds of parts of that equation as well. So the problem is we need to figure out when human oversight is useful and when human oversight isn't useful, particularly if we're trying to address something that's there. For example, if we have systems which allow everyone to speed at will, you know is it good for us to have a particular system that prevents people from the architecture to do that? So there's this concept that Lawrence Lessig proposes, which is the four modalities of regulation. And when we talk about regulation, it's a much broader concept than just regulation or in the law. Regulation in terms of how do we change behaviors. And so there are four different levers that you can push and pull. The first one is in relation to the law, the blunt instrument of the law that you can sort of choose to change behavior. The second one is in relation to the architecture or the technology itself. So if the AI doesn't allow human oversight in certain areas, it might shut out the kind of undesirable behavior that you don't want. But sometimes you might need the human oversight. Is knowing when to put that in that I think comes back down to human judgment at the design process that needs to be very, very trustworthy and very sort of benevolent, right? So that's the second element. The third one, of course, is social norms, particularly in areas. I'm not talking about the law, unfortunately, because we're quite developed and it's an incredibly rich discipline. But other areas where you really don't know what is the correct and fair things to do. Like if you talk about autonomous weapons that are being used right now in warfare, very hard to know what is the right thing to do, what is the wrong thing to do. Working through that and figuring out what the social norms around that is very, very, very difficult. So that's the third lever that you can push and pull. And the last one is really on market forces, what the market can bear. You can come up with any kind of, like right now we've got a social media ban that we're trying to introduce in Australia. And we can say all these things. We've said the blunt instrument of the law is no 16-year-old can get on the social media on social media. But then we've actually discovered actually it's not all social media platforms. It doesn't regulate, say, Roblox, which is an area that my young child might access and be subjected to quite heinous content.
What is
So it
it?
doesn't work. Roblox is it's a kind of like
Yeah,
it's a
it's
software,
a
it's a computer
game.
game. Yeah. And that people talk to each other. So I'm always very conscious, like, can't have
It's
that.
scary.
Yeah. So you've got the blunt instrument of the law that somebody says, let's do this. But they didn't really quite work it out with the technology. And so then you've got this technology, and what they didn't explain to everyone is that sure, you might put a ban on 16-year-olds, but what you're actually doing is you're creating age verification across the internet in Australia. And we've rejected that kind of age verification and kind of collection of data. The reason why we have privacy laws in Australia is because we used to have or try and introduce the national identification card in 1987 or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, everybody rejected that, but then they went, oh, well, we'll take the laws that regulate privacy. So we'll take then we had the Privacy Act of 1988. And we're seeing so many problems with collection of data in Australia because we've got cybersecurity issues that keep coming up aboard. And then you've got the issues with the social media ban. You've got then the technology, which they haven't quite worked out. You've got the norms, and we know that we've got to do something because since 2012 we've had a massive mental health epidemic affecting young women in particular because of social media. So we've got to do something about it. I absolutely think that you got to do something about it. And then the final thing when it comes to market forces, if you can see the pushback, right? Where Google is using YouTube because YouTube was meant to be caught under that, and it started to generate its market. Yeah, you're talking about gigantic tech companies with highly sophisticated people who can talk to the market, who can produce documents that advocate for their position. And so, when you go and do a Google search, there's this find out why YouTube is so important, to young people and stuff. And I think it is, and so understanding how these levers and how they're pushed is so important when you're talking about what is trustworthy AI, how do you regulate AI technology, and what happens from then on, what's the governance arrangements with that.
Mhm. Wow, what a topic. Now,
That's right.
I
I feel
know,
like I'm
right?
going to this a very
I'm
interesting
usually,
lecture. Yeah, that's right.
Am
I
I
told you, a
manipulating
masterclass in
the
ethics.
monopolizing the whole conversation?
All right, team question again, guys, because I guess this is where both of your worlds overlap. We already know AI can accelerate efficiency, but it can also accelerate inequality if we're not careful. So, how about bias in AI, which has been a global conversation, and I'm sure it's not slowing down anytime soon. So, from both your vantage point, how do we make sure AI improves justice instead of accelerating historical biases, especially when the data itself reflects inequities from the past?
This is
Hmm.
Brydon. He loves this.
I
We're
don't know whether this
gonna
is
we're
something that
gonna
is
hand this
easy.
over to him.
No, I think this is one of those areas that is extraordinarily hard to answer, and it comes down, I think, to data and historical kind of databases. A lot of what we use to train a large language model comes from the crawl that we used to do, where we soaked in all the information um, that robots used to go, spiders used to go across the internet and scrape across. And that means that a lot of the content, for example, like on Reddit, was scraped into it. And so we have a lot of inherent bias in the data that was used to train a lot of these large language models, data that is incredibly hard to then remove. And it's quite hard to make a large language model forget. And so then you've got to constantly try and create all these guardrails, which I think doesn't quite work. And because, as Lena points out, the moment it's able to find a crack in the guardrail that you've put up, it will do all sorts of terrible things. It's
It's
almost as
right
if
through
now,
in a flash. Yeah.
yeah, it's almost as if what we've now, look, I think as a lot of governments start talking about data sovereignty and AI sovereignty, they might start to develop their own kind of models, large language models that they will train on their own kind of databases that might suit them. And maybe from that perspective, you might get much better tools that are less biased. But I don't think that that's something that's easily solved, and I think it's something that we constantly need to be vigilant about. And that's why you've got that duty to verify. I think at the end of the day, when you say, can we have an AI system that is not biased? I think we need to ask the question: can we have
And what does that
human beings in
mean?
societies? Yeah, can we have human beings in societies that are not biased?
Yeah.
Who's saying it's biased? Where is it coming from? Uh, that's not to say it's not biased. I absolutely believe that it's biased, but it's really a question of who's asking the question, what's the perspective, what are the concerns, how can we address them. I think when we start looking at it from such a big perspective of this big broad bias word, it becomes incredibly hard to sort of resolve and find good solutions to. But I think when you break it down to where it touches sort of practical areas of your life, that's when you can come up with really good sort of solutions that are targeted. So that's my view, at least. Yeah.
But even if you are only training them just on the law, I mean, and it's not a big enough corpus anyway. But as I've said this to you before, there are inherent judges are human, so their inherent biases will come out in their judgment. So you can never get an unbiased AI model as long as you're training it across a whole corpus of data.
Uh-huh.
What does bias mean? You just don't want it to be.
You don't want to have systemic injustice that creates
That's right. Thank you.
deep harm that destabilizes society. Yeah, no, I think that's
Exactly.
basically.
Exactly.
Well, that's such an important reminder. You can't fix a bias system by pretending the bias is not there.
Yep,
And
of course.
you need the courage to confront it. And As someone who's worked in corporate environments that are slowly waking up to diversity gaps, your point really hits home. And before I let you guys go, let me come back to you for this one, Dana, because this is where things get spicy. Spicy for the legal world. Eventually, AI may be capable of making legally relevant recommendations, perhaps even highly accurate ones. So, imagining what's coming next and not too far off, what should ultimately have the final authority? Human judgment, institutional policy, or the system's own optimized reasoning?
Well, when you say an AI eventually becomes capable of doing this, so somebody would have had to build the model, and built into the model would be, I think you would have your policy decisions, your human judgment would all be built into, and the system's own optimized reasoning. All that has to be coded in. AI is not just some kind of amorphous thing where it's just AI. I mean, somebody has to actually build the tool. So I think you would have to, whoever's designing the tool would have taken all these values that you say into it. And I do think ultimately you should have an ability to tap out to check whether it's only a recommendation. So
I think our favorite person, Michael Curvey, had a really great thing to say about this. His thinking when he was looking at these large language models and legal tech in this space, he was going, I think it'll be really useful below the advocacy, the high court level or the Supreme Court level, where you want low court judges complying with the judgments further
well,
up.
yeah.
Yeah, but the moment you get to right at the very end, where you've got to have innovation in the law to respond to changes in society, that's when I think AI will actually hold us back. That's his view, and
Yeah, that's
I
why he
actually agree with
says.
that. Yeah.
Well, that's why Michael says that if you were using AI and AI like MiAI Law, for example, if you were using that tool, you would never get Marble because you would just get what was it Justice Brennan who was in the minority, the dissenting judge, you would just get that answer. You
Yes,
wouldn't
correct.
get what you got in Marble, which is where Australia recognized native title
Title.
to
Yeah.
land of the Indigenous people.
Yeah. We should also recognize that that Michael then was involved in the subsequent case of WIC, which expanded it as well, and you wouldn't get WIC, without
Yeah.
with its kind of AIs as well. Like I think you wouldn't get a Michael, and Michael is phenomenal in terms of being able to pull from different kinds of judgment. I think, look, if you set your AI up to look at legal principles that are foreign to Australia that could predict where Australia could go, it could do some really interesting things there,
But
but I would never trust it. I would prefer
no,
not,
no.
yeah.
But I reckon, Brydon, that I could design a model where you take all the precedent, but then you open up the guardrails and you allow it to draw patterns and you allow it to create something new. You can do that. But I
I
don't
would
know what
love
it
to
would
see
produce. I know. It's like an experiment, right?
that.
I
Yeah,
don't know what it
I
would
think that
actually produce.
Miles, this is our next
Oh,
topic. We should play around with that, and then Lena and I can talk through this. I would love to do that, Lena. That would be
I
really
can
interesting.
actually do that. I can actually do that because I can write just one thing and then we can let it see what it does.
Yeah,
I mean,
that'd
I
be
can
really
do
fun.
it. I mean,
We
I
can
can
have a
do it on
huge
staging.
conversation.
I've got like my staging
Sorry,
platform.
I
I can
cannot react right away because I'm thinking of, I have a lot of questions, but we don't have it right now. But
Yeah,
yeah,
no, that'll be
well,
good.
once again, the two of you have made incredibly complex issues feel clear, grounded, and surprisingly human. So thank you so much for being here again, Lena and Dr. Brydon, and for helping us explore where ethics truly belongs in a world built on intelligent systems. Thank you.
Always.
Thanks, Miles. I learned a lot.
I
Super
Me
learned
much.
too.
so much.
I
I
I,
mean,
I
my
feel
my
I
my
feel much
brain
cleverer now. Huh?
my brain has to recover.
Yeah.
Well, if I have one. But yeah, if
Yeah,
you
no,
folks
you too. I can't wait for Lena. You need to come up to Brisbane, and then we need to chat more and do stuff. I think we need to publish something as part of a white paper for the Center for Policy Futures. We
Yeah,
need
we
to
do.
figure out how to. Yeah. All right,
Yeah, we
we'll do
do.
that way because I think that will
exciting
get
times
a
ahead.
lot of a lot of eyeballs as
We
well.
do.
If you folks
Okay.
enjoyed this discussion, go back and watch our previous segment with this too, because together the episodes give you the full picture, the humans we need, and the systems we're designing for them. So visit the links below to learn more about Laina, MiAI Law, and Dr. Brydon. Thank you guys for spending your time with us. Don't forget to subscribe and check out our podcast on Spotify and Amazon Music. I'm your host, Miles, with Laina and Dr. Brydon, reminding you to stay focused and inspired with Xraised.